InDigital is on a mission to improve the 911 industry. Our goal is to create something better to go above and beyond the current standards. Our passion for creating the most advanced, well-designed solutions led to our position as an industry leader in next-gen core services. For the millions of calls processed over our emergency IP networks, to our Text for 911 solution, Texty, to our disaster recovery and backup solution, Mevo, it's easy to see we love what we do. For more information, check us out at www.indigital.net.
Rapid Deploy believes that every public safety agency, regardless of size, should have access to the data they need when it matters most. That's why since 2016, our mission has been to reduce emergency response times and improve public safety. We are the industry's only integrated emergency response platform. Our web-based cloud platform includes analytics, mapping, dispatch, and mobile apps, purpose-built for 911 in the 21st century. Visit www.rapiddeploy.com to learn how we enable effective, efficient, data-driven emergency response.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital as well as Rapid Deploy, and as always, a big thanks goes out to not only the sponsors, but especially the patrons, because I wouldn't be able to do everything that I do if it wasn't for all of you, for your support, those who watch, listen, and share. So thank you so very much for helping me do what it is that I do. This has been an amazing experience, and I am just so very grateful. So thank you all very much. I hope that you had an excellent Thanksgiving. This is November 30th. This isn't going to go out for a few weeks, but either way, I hope you had an excellent holiday, and we're going to go ahead and jump right in. I'm very excited for this guest. I've wanted him on for a while, and to be completely honest, I was a little nervous to reach out. So that's my bad, but just a little bit of talking that we were doing, man, it is all good. I don't even know why I was nervous. This dude is awesome. So we're about to get started here. And my guest today is Daniel Sundahl, and he is a firefighter, paramedic, artist with DanSun Photos, as well as a keynote speaker. All right. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ricardo.
So a lot of people that I know all over social media have probably shared one or two or more of your art pieces. And I remember when I saw this the first time, and it was a dispatcher just like kind of holding on to their head, and there's like imagery of, those who are like crying or screaming or whichever. And I remember just staring at it, and I got a little emotional myself. Like I got goosebumps because I thought, man, that is definitely a good portrayal of what that is like. After doing it for 13 and a half years and thinking back on it, sometimes I thought this is definitely it. So I applaud you. Thank you for the work that you do, not only in public safety, but also the art that you've been putting out there. And I'm excited to talk to you today.
Oh, well, thanks. I appreciate that. I know that it's you mostly have dispatchers and communications on your show, so I appreciate the invite and the opportunity to talk in this forum. And yeah, I do. I'm not a dispatcher myself, So those pictures that you're talking about, and I think you're going to show them up later, bring them up later. I didn't start doing the dispatcher or the comms images till quite a bit later, because I didn't really know. As a paramedic firefighter, I just kind of draw my own experiences and produce artwork based on that. And I started getting all these requests from dispatchers about, they're wanting me to portray artwork in their field. And, I've never done that. And I really didn't know. I'm like, well, kind of my artwork is pretty emotional and really kind of gets inside your head. And I didn't really know, I didn't have that experience myself. So I really wasn't sure how I was going to do that. And then I was in Texas, I was in Houston for a photo session. And I asked them, like, hey, can I go hang out with the dispatchers in there? So I did. I hung out there with them and I spoke with them and kind of interviewed them, probably spent 2 or 3 hours with them, and said, hey, I really want to do some artwork for you guys. I really want to represent this group of our emergency services family. But I really don't know. I don't, like, tell me what it's like. So I interviewed them, and, by the time, like, the stories I heard, it just curled my toes, the stuff that I heard. I had no idea. I really didn't understand what it meant or what it was like to be a dispatcher. And, by the time we were done speaking and, we were all really emotional, I'm like, perfect. Now's the time that we're in this mindset to get these photos done. And the majority of the photos, still the best dispatch photos that I've done are from that photo session. A lot of them are on my website. So yeah, it was a real eye opener for me. So since that day, I've always been a huge supporter, and anything I can do to include dispatchers in my artwork, I'll do it.
It's interesting. A lot of people that I've talked to that don't come from the communication side of it, and those also in the general public. I'll give a perfect example. I go to get my hair cut, and the person who's cutting my hair is wanting to. I'm a little wolfed out right now. That's why I have a hat on. But the few times that I've gone, even recently, I've been out of dispatch for 7 years now. But the person always wants to have a little bit of small talk going, and they'll say, so what do you do for a living? And I'll tell them, and I'll say, but before that, for 13 and a half years, I was the 911 dispatcher, and then they'll ask, questions, and I'll gladly go ahead and give them some information. And that is one of those things too, where I had no idea that I thought you guys just, kind of answered the phones and the officers out there. And I'm like, well, that is one little piece. Yes. But, there's so much more that comes with it. When we're answering the phone, yeah, we sound focused. Sometimes people think that we don't really care because of how we sound. But if our voice moves up an octave, you're going to panic on the phone. And they're like, oh, I guess I never thought about that. Like, yeah, well, we got to stay calm. But in the back of our heads, we're freaking out just like you are, man. Like there's a lot that's going on but we have to keep everybody calm and get that information. So yeah, that is definitely interesting. A lot of people saying, I had no idea. I didn't know that there was more to it. And spending all that time with them, for you, I can see how, all that information, especially if everyone is getting, emotional at that time, that probably helps those creative juices as well to really put it in perspective.
Yeah. And it's, when I create the artwork, I try to reproduce more of what I felt on the calls I've been on versus what I see. I think that's because that's kind of my process, and it's kind of how I heal my cracked mind a little bit, is by reproducing the emotions, because it's more powerful than what I've actually seen. What I actually see, I don't think is as important as how I reacted to that, or the lasting emotions or the scars that leave is a bit more significant for me, and something that I need to work through. But I think for dispatchers, there's always this bit of I don't want to say rivalry, but for the street medics and police and firefighters, I've heard some people say, like, there's, all the dispatchers want to do is they don't understand what they do. And, they call us at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, hey man, they're not doing that just because, they're bored. Like that's their job. But, and this is going to make me look bad. When I started getting those calls from dispatchers wanting me to do the artwork, I'm like, well, I don't understand. I'm like, you guys aren't there. You're not, like, why are you guys stressed? Now, why are you guys being affected
Mhm.
You know, you're not there, you're not seeing the things, you're not witnessing the screaming people. So I didn't really understand, right? And I was just completely ignorant at the time, but I wanted to learn, and that's why I talked to them, and now I realize that there are stressors that dispatchers have that we don't, even when we're there.
Mhm.
You know, I now feel that dispatchers are the first responders. Like they're listening to people, you know, while the incident is happening. You know, they're listening to people get murdered and screaming for their lives. You know, by the time we get there, it's usually already over.
Mhm.
And then we're just kind of mopping up the pieces and trying to pick up the pieces while you guys are there while it's happening. Right. And then often you guys don't know the outcome. You know, you don't know what happens. Right. So I've learned a lot, and I was admittedly pretty ignorant as a paramedic when I first started getting these requests from other dispatchers to create some artwork for them. So I really try to share that and educate the pre-hospital, you know, road guys and girls that, you know, the dispatchers are one of us, and they have stresses that are often sometimes worse than us.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things is, you know, it's the fact that it's because we don't see it, you know, we probably create something way worse in our mind
Mm.
than what is actually there.
That's why the book is always better than the movie, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's what it is. The book is always better than the movie because your mind is creating the scenario,
Yeah.
right? And there's a lot of open options there that, yeah, it's like, I certainly couldn't do the job.
Yeah, it's almost like one of those, I don't remember exactly what it's called, but it's one of those books. It's like a choose your own destiny type book, or your own,
Yeah,
you know, when you pick like the one paragraph, and it's like, if you pick this one, turn to page like 45
yeah,
or whatever. Yeah, and you're creating your own thing. And but the crappy thing though is, you know, there's no closure. Then you don't know
yeah,
how it ends a lot of the times. It's like, damn, I wonder what happened. And sometimes, you know, we do get to find out if, you know, when someone would call for their times and numbers, whether it be, you know, fire or EMS or whichever, they'd call for the times. It's like, can you tell me what else happened? And sometimes they would be able to, other times they didn't have any more information than I did. And
yeah.
all right, well, I guess I'll move on to
Yeah,
the
I've done that too. And sometimes we're like, yeah, it was no big deal, man. It was nothing. It was, they're like, man, the person was screaming on the phone for the lights. I'm like, yeah, it was nothing. They just had a minor cut on their hand from cutting an onion, and there wasn't a whole lot of blood. And they're like, oh my God, I thought someone was getting murdered. I'm like, no, it was nothing. We didn't even transport them.
yeah, yeah.
You know, meanwhile, you're thinking, oh my God, someone's going to cut their hand off and they're bleeding to death. I'm like, no, it's not. That's not what. But the opposite happens too, where we get dispatched to, oh yeah, this person fell down the stairs. I'm like, yeah, they fell down the stairs and broke their neck and, you know, busted their hip, and they vomited and now they're choking to death. Right? It's you never know what you're gonna
Yeah.
see, because often you guys don't get all the information either.
No.
Right? So
It just creates, you know, just all this chaos and stuff, and then you're
yeah.
like, oh, how did it end?
But you know, Ricardo, like, to be honest, that's why we do it, right? Like, that's why we do it, right?
Right.
We do it because I've been doing it for almost 20 years now, and I still go to work on the ambulance, and I don't know what I'm going to see, and I still see things that I've never seen before, even after 20 years. Like, I'll go to a call, and I'm like, wow, what did I just see? Like, and how often can you get that from doing the same job after 20 years, right? And I think that's why a lot of us still do it. Right?
Oh,
It is
art.
exciting and crazy,
Right. And
which
because we all know that, you know, public safety doesn't get paid the greatest. So it's
no,
not for the money.
no, it's not for the money.
Oh,
Yeah, no, it's not for the money.
yeah.
But
Yeah. There's
yeah,
definitely a lot that goes on. So I travel to, well, when we were able to,
mhm,
I would go to a bunch of different conferences, and I've got this session that I do at different conferences called Imagine Listening. And the tagline for it is, your worst day is our everyday. And the first half of it, it's an hour long. The first 30 minutes, dispatchers share their I am 911 stories. And some of them are pretty emotional, man. Like, you know, there's a lot of people who are in there just letting it all out. Just,
mhm,
it's, you know, a form of peer support. But then the last 30 minutes is open mic, and we share all the funny shit that happens in 911, whether it be an open mic situation where, someone has been singing or says something that sounds very provocative, but it's really not what it is, and it goes over the radio, or, some funny calls that people have dealt with. And let me tell you, there are a bunch of calls that I've heard about from other dispatchers that I had not ever dealt with before. And those are live episodes. Like I have, we record them live and then I put them out as episodes, but it's a live audience. And, there's stuff like that. There's a dispatcher once that was giving CPR instructions to a guy who kept saying that, his baby is not breathing. And this was being told during the funny part, and people are like, ha ha, like, should we be laughing at this? Like, I'm not sure what's going on.
That doesn't sound very funny.
Right. Yeah. And then so what it turns out is, officers get there. They were the first ones to get there before EMS got there. And the officer goes, slow everybody down. And the dispatcher's like, and I'm thinking, why the hell are we going to slow him down? The baby's not breathing. What's going on? He's doing CPR. And the officer comes over the radio and it says, it's an iguana. It's an iguana. And we're like, what?
The baby is an iguana. The baby is an iguana.
Yeah. It was the person's, that was their baby, was the iguana. That's how they were calling it.
But you know what, that's a good point, because this is something I've learned from doing this job for such a long time. Our definitions of an emergency are not the same as most other people's definitions of an emergency. So for that guy, got to see iguana. He probably had that iguana for 80 years. Who knows, right? Like, it's probably a 100-year-old iguana, and this thing's dying. So for him, that is a true emergency. His family member is dying, right? But for us, it's a lizard, right? So it's, it's we have to kind of have that perspective where, we're kind of messed up as far as where our threshold of emergencies are, and other people's. That doesn't make their emergency less of an emergency. Exactly. Because of our experiences, because usually, most people don't have the same experiences that we do.
Yeah. And when we would train people, I would tell them every time, like, every single call that comes in, man, you need to treat it as priority one. Emergency every time. When it comes on an emergency line, it will be that one time that you're like, this is, bullshit or something, that's going to be a true, like, you're going to end up on the news. So always, take it as a high priority, because that is just like you said, the same thing. That's their emergency. That could be the first time that they're calling. And if you're being a jerk or whatever, condescending, whichever, they might not ever call again, man. And that's not what we want to happen.
Yeah.
We want people to call for help. And that's why we're there, is to help them out. It might sound ridiculous, but that's their emergency, just like you're saying, for sure.
Yeah. It's crazy.
An iguana. It was. And she didn't find that out to the very end. So textbook CPR the whole time, and then at very end, it's like, it's an iguana. Slow people down.
But again, what's the outcome? Did the iguana survive, Ricardo? That's what we all want to know. Did it survive?
From what she said, the iguana actually passed away.
Passed away. Oh, I hope they had a beautiful ceremony.
Of course. Yes. Of course.
Celebration of life for their little iguana.
So let's go back in time a little bit.
Sure.
You said you've been in public safety for how many years now?
Well, let's see. I became, let's say 18 years. It's kind of
years.
On and off. And
How'd you get started to begin with? Paramedic, firefighter. Did you come from a family of public safety, or did you?
No, not at all. No, not at all. My dad was a carpenter. Well, I guess my mom was a nurse. So I guess so, to my mom. And I was living I guess this is how it started. I was living in the Cayman Islands, and I was training as a dive master, which was great. This is a long time ago. This was the late 80s. And part of the training for a dive master is the medical part of doing water rescue without, getting attacked and drowning, while saving people. So we did that training all day, and it was really fun. And as I was driving home, I watched this guy walk in front of the street and get smoked by this giant dump truck. And I got so excited. I'm like, I just learned how to do water rescue. I'm going to go help this guy. So I pulled over and I run up to this guy, and he's like folded in half, and his foot's by his face, and he's gargling. And I'm like, I have no idea what to do. But I was so excited, and I just jumped in my car and ran over there and then watched the paramedics come and unfold the guy and take him away. Then I thought, wow, that's kind of a weird reaction to have. Most people would either look away or kind of stand on the side and
Right.
do anything. But from, the few days I had of this rescue diving course I was taking, I really thought this would be an opportunity to help somebody. And then my brother said, hey, you should maybe be a paramedic. And I'm like, oh yeah, that'd be really fun, exciting job. And early in my life, I kind of committed to, I told myself, Daniel, you need to live the richest, fullest life that you can and say no to all experiences. And that's kind of how I ended up in the Cayman Islands in the first place.
Mhm.
And I thought, yeah, working as a paramedic, that's going to be a full life. That's the biggest show. I say it's the biggest show in the world, biggest show on earth, where, that's really where stuff happens.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where I first got the idea. And then I, became a food and beverage manager, and then I became a English teacher, and kind of always had that in the back of my mind. And then like the mid 90s, I did the first level of training, the EMR training at that time, and then became an EMT in 1996. And then I became a advanced care paramedic in 2002.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you'd been doing, okay, hold on. Before I say that, would you say that first encounter, is that where it kind of, got in your blood there? You did that training, this accident happens, and you're rushing over there, and you've got this rush like of wanting to help. And it obviously it stuck with you.
Yeah, I think that's when I first realized that there was something wrong with me, right? Where it's like, that is not a normal reaction, right? And I think I could speak for most emergency workers where, yeah, we don't react the same way that most people do, right? And to emergencies, where we run to it and get adrenaline and get excited, versus, people looking away, or they, they don't know what to do, or they panic, or they. So I think that's when I first realized, yeah, I want to go see this thing. I want to go toward it and get to experience it, really. And if I can help, then I want to get all the training I possibly can to help in this situation. And that's why I wanted to go to the highest level that I could pre-hospitally, because I wanted to have as many tools as I could to help these people and have these experiences. And I'm really, for me, being an advanced care paramedic, that's where we get to do all the really cool stuff of, criking and, intubating, and we can thrombolize, we can, pace and cardiovert and do all this really cool stuff. And then when we do get to do that stuff and it works, then, you drive home and you're like, holy fuck, what did I just do today? Right? Like what just happened today? Or, you'll go to work and you'll just have these crazy experiences, or be involved with somebody that's, the end of life situation, maybe with multiple people. And then you go home and have to act like it's just a normal day and think, wow, like how do I make that transition from, well, this is the most significant event in this person's life other than their birth, and now I have to go home and, take the garbage out and shovel the sidewalks and, make sure the bills are paid and, be a normal person to my family.
Right.
It's a really weird transition. But yeah, I think that's kind of the tip of the spear, I think, of living a full life, in my opinion. Like, I'm not going to speak for anybody else, but it certainly has been that way for me.
Yeah. It's interesting how, so I'm just kind of flashbacking myself and some of my past experiences, and seeing you rushing over there to help out. I used to talk with my coworkers and say, if you were ever in a situation where something happened in front of you, you would do something, right? Like you wouldn't just let it go. And they're like, I've never really thought about it. I would hope that I would. And I'm like, well, and I said to them, I was like, I'm probably going to sound like a weirdo or something, but I have been in the grocery store in line and looking at the people in front of me or whichever, and thinking, okay, if that person fell over, I would immediately go to them, tell this person to get the AED, to tell this person to call 911. And like I'm running scenarios in my
Yeah.
head. Now, it's never happened, but there was one time a few years back where there was this home for the elderly across from where I lived, and my son and I were outside. We were going to order some Chinese food or something, and we hear a little voice saying, "Help, help." And we're looking around and looking around. I don't see anyone. And I thought maybe somebody's just got their TV on. And then we hear it again. And I happen to look down, and there's a little lady, a little old lady she is face down in the driveway. Like if anybody were to come, they would not see her, and they'd run her over. And I told my son, I said, go inside right now, tell your mom I'm running over there to go help this person out. And I just hauled ass running. And I go over to help her out, and I'm running through EMD protocols in my head of what to do and what not to do. And she wasn't hurt or anything, because you're not supposed to move anyone, but she was able to get up. And but when she got up, like she had like the skin on her forehead just kind of flopped and she was bleeding. I was like, oh my God. So I'm helping her with that, and the nurses in the home are just looking at us like, what are you doing? I'm like, get over here, what are you doing? And you know, and I call 911, and it happened to be someone that I knew because it was from a neighboring agency. And ended up getting through it and stuff. And I'll never forget that little old lady. She said, you were like my guardian angel. I have no idea where you came from or how you know what you're doing. And she goes, but thank you. And after the situation, I went back across the street, and my son is like, good job, Dad. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, someone must have heard me, that I was having this conversation, and this happened.
Yeah. And then you just go back and finish cutting the grass or something, right? After that.
Right.
Yeah. What was I doing? Oh yeah, I was working on my taxes. Yeah, let's get back to that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that, having that situation happen, or taking a phone call, or like you're saying, working on people, and then going back to normal life. And and doing that, playing with the kids, or cooking food, or doing your taxes, like you're saying. It's like you're separating work and life. And sometimes it doesn't always work. Sometimes it comes home, and then you got to deal with it that way as well.
Yeah, and that is the problem, right? And that's kind of what a lot of stuff that I focus on with the artwork. But I'd rather have that where I go to work and live on the edge of life, not all the time, of course, but sometimes, and then come home and go back to a safe reality. I'd rather have that transition than be, again, me personally, than to live in a normal, safe reality all the time, which really sounds weird when I verbalize it that way. But that's what I mean. I think that's when I realized that many of us are kind of weird that way.
Yeah, it takes a special type of person, right?
Yeah, special. That's a good way of saying it. Yeah, we'll call it that. Yeah.
There's a lot of different situations. And I remember I would talk to family and friends and stuff, and I would kind of chuckle, and they would just be staring at me like, why are you laughing at that? I'm like, okay, there's a certain amount of dark humor you have to have in having a job like this.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you're going to burn out, or you're just going to dwell on it. It's not going to be a good thing. So in any profession that's like this, me personally, just me talking, I think you kind of have to have, some of this dark humor. You might be crying more than laughing. And like I said, you're going to burn out.
Yeah, you need to have an outlet. You need to have a way to express it, or work through it, or I think it's process it. You need a way to process the shit that you see, right? Because we see some abnormal stuff. I guess it's abnormal. Sometimes I wonder if it's abnormal, because for us that's normal.
It's true.
Is it normal, and is it abnormal in a normal world, or for us is that a normal situation? Is that our normal world, right? And that kind of messes with us too. That's how we become so. Some of us are hyper vigilant, or we think it's a dangerous place. I'm like, yeah, it is a dangerous place. We just went to a house where a whole family was murdered. Yeah, it's dangerous. This is not a safe place. And that kind of stuff never makes the news. People don't hear about it. They're like, yeah, you don't know the crap that goes on in the world.
Right.
It really messes with your mind a bit,
I think the curtain ends up getting pulled on the reality of life in certain parts of society, or whichever, because we're hearing it or seeing it all. And then, when you talk about, or when you talk with friends and family, they stare because they had no idea. It's like, I thought that was just in the news. Well, I mean, it's in the news, yeah, but it's news around us. Look at your local news. This stuff is
Yeah.
happening, but we're firsthand taking it in. So,
Yeah. But what's normal is that like, is our family's reality, is that a normal reality, or is what we see a normal reality? Or because we're emergency workers, where we're kind of at the tip. So like a military, like a Marine, is that a normal reality
Mhm.
compared to other people? Like, who? I don't think it is. I personally, I don't think what we see is a normal, or I try to think that it makes me feel better that that's not normal, that it's better to be in a safe, non-crazy world is normal. And that kind of gives me a little bit of comfort to realize that. And then when I go to work, I just kind of visit the circus for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then, and then I'll live in the circus crazy world for a little bit, and then go back to my normal life. That's how I try to see it.
Yeah. No, that's definitely a good way to put it. I think that in some of those cases where they become very horrific, in those cases you see that monsters are real, and sometimes
Oh
it's it's people. and
yeah,
and it might be just situations that happen, because not all of it is, I don't know. I like that, the way you put it. We visit the circus every now
yeah.
and
We visit the circus when we go to work, and then we leave.
then,
Right?
popcorn, yeah, and then you go
Then
back.
we leave. Yeah,
You're on overtime, but either way.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh man. So how long were you a paramedic before you started doing firefighting as well?
Well, right away. So I did all my training as a paramedic, and when I was looking for full time, I was working part time in a lot of places, and where I'm from, there's lots of work for paramedics, or at that time, and there still is now. Uh, I was looking for a kind of a full time job, a place to land, and one of the places I applied for was a fire department that was just about to take over the EMS side and become full time. And I thought, that might be, and at that time, I really had no inclination or desire to be a firefighter. I never really did. It was always the medical part. But I thought, this would be really interesting. It'll be more dynamic to do both. And I'm really glad I made that decision. And I think that's why I didn't burn out as, like a lot of other medics do after, that 7-year wall, is because I do both. So I'll do a shift on the ambulance, and then a day off, then a shift on the fire truck, then I'm off for 5 days. So it's a really different, I get both worlds in, and I get a long break from each, and it's a lot more dynamic that way. And then, so when I did that, when I got hired on with that department, they trained me up as the firefighter side.
Man. Okay. So I have to ask, what was the training like for both? Because I only know training from my side. I know a lot of people in every discipline, and have heard about some of their training, but for you, what was that training like? Because I mean, you've got this, you had that early on training, and then you have that incident with a person who gets hit by the vehicle and stuff, and then you go on, then you come back to it, and you're already paramedic and stuff. But I mean, what was that training like? Like, what was it all that you were doing? And I mean, was it really satisfying as well? It was like, was it getting in? You're like, yeah, this is what I want to do. This is still.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. Like the paramedic course was pretty intense. It was so from where I'm from Western Canada. I'm from Alberta, and for Alberta at that time in the 90s, if you want to become a paramedic, that's what I wanted to do. I says I want to become a paramedic, and at that time it was EMR, EMT paramedic. I'm like, okay, what do I need to do to become a paramedic? Okay, well, first I need to do an EMR, which is an emergency medical responder, and that was. God, I think that was maybe a couple of months or maybe a month-long course. I can't remember. So I did that because you needed that course to become an EMT. Mm-hmm. EMT was about a year with practicum. So I did that. And then after I did that course, that's when I started to travel. And I said, no, I met a girl, and we became English teachers and traveled the world as English teachers. And then I came back. And then I decided I wanted to finish my paramedic program. So then the paramedic program was another 2 years on top of that. And yeah, it was pretty intense. It was a lot of training. I've certainly felt didactically prepared, but a large part of that is practicums as well. So we spent a lot of time on the ambulance during that program. And then then I started working on the ambulance after that training, and then realized pretty quickly how little I actually knew. And then applying all that stuff on my own without the support of a preceptor. But I think that's how most of us are when we kind of get onto the street right away. So that's how the paramedic part works for us. And then for my training for fire, it was kind of gradual. So I kind of did separate courses. And for my courses at the time, our fire courses were every weekend, over 2 weekends for one course. And there's several courses of probably 10, 20, 30 courses that you take over time to become a full level 2 firefighter, which is what I am. And that was fun. Like the firefighter training is really fun because you're doing stuff. You're putting wet stuff on red stuff and cutting cars apart, and it's really cool. Yeah.
So what were some of those differences going from the one training as paramedic going to firefighter? And were there any moments where you're like, damn, I don't know, should I do this? Or were you just full on in and you knew like, this is exactly what I want to be doing?
Oh yeah. I was full on in. I knew that's what I wanted to do. I loved it. And I knew at that time, that's really what I wanted to do. So I was pumped for it. And then when you get that structure fire, or you go to that cardiac arrest, or, you do the stuff that you think you're going to do every single day, which you do, maybe once a week or maybe once a month, then that just refuels it. Like, oh yeah, that's just the coolest thing that I can experience. And again, that's going back to living a full life for me, or working in those things, not being an observer, but actually being involved and being in a position where you can really actually make a difference. Right. So when those things happened, even though I work in a small department, we did a lot of things. Like I've been to a lot of structure fires, and, our ambulance is really busy. So that always just refueled me to realize, yeah, this is a super cool job. And I'm making a difference in people's lives, which is really cool.
Do you remember any of your earlier calls that you went out to, maybe even some that you were like, yeah, this is pretty intense? And I asked because there were a few early on for myself. One where, this guy, it was actually my first night working midnight shift at the most recent agency that I was at. It was an agency in a county that I actually grew up in. And I remember I went in, I'm sitting with my trainer. We've got the umbilical cord hooked up so that I can hear the calls, but have my side muted. And it was a guy who called in who said, you need to send an ambulance out here. I thought it was an animal that was crawling on the side of the road, and it's a guy. And my trainer's, asking all this information, and he's like, the person's jaw is like hanging from his face. So what happened was the guy, I guess he tried to shoot himself with a shotgun, and he missed, and that piece was hanging off. So we're getting people out there, but as I'm listening to this, I remember thinking in my head, damn, like this is more intense than my first dispatch position. I was working for a small police department in Florida, and then moved back home to Southwest Michigan. And that was the first call that I sat in on. And I thought, yeah, this is way more intense.
Yeah. I had a lot of crazy calls early on in my career. A lot of them I depict in my artwork, the ones that really stick.
Yeah.
But some of the ones that really stick in my mind early on are kind of the reasons why I want to do the job in the first place. I guess one of the first ones, and I don't know, for paramedic, and I can just speak for myself, it's, when you're done your paramedic training, you're pretty confident. You're like, yeah, and you pass, after you write the provincial exams, and then you write the exams to get on with an employer. You feel pretty accomplished, as you should feel. until you do that first call as a paramedic and you have an EMT partner who doesn't have the same level of training. And then it kind of falls all on your shoulders and you're by yourself. So for me, for that first 2 years as a fresh paramedic, I was pretty humbled and realized how little I actually know. And, during that time, we went to a call, and we get tons of snow here. I was at the end of my shift, and it was pretty far away from our station. And it took a long time to get there. Then we got stuck in the house next door because we went to the wrong address. And I'm thinking it was a psychiatric emergency. And I thought, you know what, the police are there. They could probably just transport. If they don't, it's been like a half hour since the call came in. So I called dispatch. I'm like, hey, is there, we're stuck in the snow here. We need a tow truck. Is there any way that the police can? So as I'm on the phone with my dispatch, the police come out and they're waving us over. I'm like, oh, that's never a good sign. That's never a good sign when they look panicked and waving us over. I'm like, oh, crap. So me and my partner, we grabbed our kits. Tow truck was on the way. And I go in there. So my partner goes in the room and I just talk to the husband. And the first thing the husband tells me is that my wife is possessed by the devil. And I'm like, all right. I'm thinking, what treatment do I have for exorcism? They never trained me this and they never taught me this in school. Yeah. I'm like, okay, well, fair enough. And the house was very religious. They had all these religious stuff up on the walls and stuff. And lots of doilies and Last Supper paintings. And I'm like, well, sir, can you tell me what happened? He goes, yeah, we went to this different church and now she's possessed by the devil. I'm like, okay, well, she's having some type of psychiatric break. So I walk into the bedroom and this older lady, she's probably in her 70s, is being restrained by 3 huge police officers. My partner is on there trying to get an IV in her and she's like fighting these people off. And she looks up at me and speaks in this really low, growly devil voice. I'm not even going to tell you. I know this is like an adult podcast stuff, but I'm not even going to tell you what she told me. And she said it in this low voice. She looked at me and just said this most graphic, vile thing. And I'm like, holy fuck, she is possessed by the devil. I'm like, what the hell what do I do? Like this woman she doesn't even sound like a woman. Like she sounds like an animal when she speaks. And this little growly voice. And I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. So I sedated her with the max amount and nothing happened. We finally got her restrained, taken her to the hospital, and she would kind of go in and out of these phases of lucidity for her. So she would look at us and she'd kind of come into her own consciousness and she goes, what's going on? What's happening? I'm like, oh, we're taking you to the hospital. You had some type of attack. She goes, oh, am I okay? And I'm like, yeah, I think so. All her vitals were okay. And then her face would change, her eyes would change, and then she would speak like the devil again. I'm like, man, this is nuts. And we had a student with us, an EMT student. And I'm like, God, I am not prepared for this. I had no idea that this kind of stuff happened. And then I can see how back in, the old days, how people would think that people got possessed by the devil when they've had these mental breaks.
Right.
And it turns out that this, they had a recent loss in their family and, and this is just her brain, her mind was cracked or was broken. And that's how she was kind of protecting herself, I guess.
Wow.
And, but I gave her the max amount of sedatives that I could give her and it wasn't doing a thing. Right. They got to the hospital and they gave her propofol to put her down. And I talked to the doctor who knew the family. And that's when he told me they had a recent death in the family and they really haven't been coping very well. And she just, had a breakdown.
Wow.
So that was really early on my career. That was crazy.
Dude.
And lots of other weird stuff happens that, you can't possibly prepare you for in school. But.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You get your basics and then, your advanced stuff and you have all these tools. But then when it comes down to an actual incident or something that's going on and you have something like that happens.
That never even came up in a scenario in my, in my training. Right. They never. Okay. So you called to this guy that, this woman that's possessed by the devil. Her head is spinning and she's levitating above her bed. What do you do? It's like, well, that's never going to happen. Come on. That's a ridiculous scenario.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's, and, there wasn't any trauma. There wasn't any, there wasn't any blood. There wasn't any nasty graphic stuff. And I think those, those ones don't really stick with me too much. It's like it's the ones that really get inside my head. Like we recently went to this guy who came in as a attempted suicide, and we get there and the guy's standing there and he's got blood on him. I'm like, hey man, what's going on? Are you all right? He goes, do you have a weapon on you? He goes, no, I don't got anything. I'm like, this came in and are you trying to hurt yourself? What's going on? He goes, no, I'm fine. I just need help. I need you to take me to a hospital in case it gets worse. I'm like, okay, yeah, no problem. I'm like, did you hurt yourself? There's blood on your shirt. And he goes, no, that may not be my blood. I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, I probably shouldn't tell you, but I think I may have just murdered somebody. I'm like, okay, whatever. So then my partner goes and checks the house and checks the thing, and there's nothing there. And he's super calm, super relaxed. I do vitals. I'm like, hey man, okay, we'll take you to the hospital. Again, it's a psychiatric emergency that this guy's having, but he's very calm. And we take him to the hospital, and it turns out this guy, he just murdered this woman, but he was super calm, and he wanted to take her car and go down to the States and kill the president is what he wanted to do. But he was super calm in the back of the ambulance. I was talking to him nice and calm. I didn't have to do anything. Mm-hmm. Just kept him calm. And yeah, he had just murdered this woman. Right. And so that really, I think about that. I'm like, oh man, that's like no gore, no blood, didn't have to do anything. No sense of emergency, but just those are the ones that really stick to me. The psychiatric emergencies, I don't like psychiatric emergencies, which is funny because I'm pursuing a master's degree now in psychology, which is weird. But on the ambulance, I do not because you really can't. It's difficult to talk to those people and really manage them that way, which is, I think, the biggest tool any pre-hospital person has is people skills, right? But when that is gone, then things can escalate and get a bit crazy pretty quick.
Right. It's interesting and scary, right? When you deal with someone who is that calm, especially over the phone, when I've taken calls where someone is just fully calm, yet some crazy shit has happened that I'm asking all these questions, but they haven't given the information. And then, a little bit after, you find out how crazy the call actually is. And you're like, man, I remember the person's voice. There was no high pitch, nothing. Sometimes when people are excited, their voice gets higher, or you can kind of tell when someone is making up a story. But when they're just straight across, sometimes that over someone screaming is sometimes a little more eerie than
those are the ones that freak me
out. Else.
Yeah, I had this giant he was schizophrenic, and his pills weren't working anymore. So he called us, and he was great. He said, yeah, my pills I don't think are working. I need a med adjustment. I'm like, okay, great. He goes, yeah, I'm schizophrenic. I hear voices, and I'm starting to hear the voices again. So I need help. I'm like, great. Hey, man, no problem. Giant guy, probably 350, like almost 7 feet. This guy was enormous.
Oh, man. It's like a wrestler.
So we come in, we're taking him to the hospital, and I'm like, okay, what's going on? What's different now? He goes, yeah, I'm hearing voices in your radio. I'm like, okay. I says, I believe that you're hearing voices in your radio. I don't hear the voices, but I believe you hear them. What are they telling you? And like, they're telling me to kill you. I'm like, oh, okay. So I turned my radio off. I'm like, did you understand that's probably not a good thing? And I'd prefer you didn't do that. He goes, yeah, I know. I get that. And that's why I called you guys to get help. I'm like, all right, fair enough. And then I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to do if this guy attacks me? Because I know this could go sideways pretty quick. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, I made sure the doors were unlocked, made sure I had a quick exit out of the back of the ambulance if I had to. But this guy one punch would have collapsed my skull. This guy was a monster. And it was a very calm call. We're going there, and it was very relaxed. But in my mind, I'm thinking, this guy, if he snaps, and he could just at any second just turn on me. I didn't have to do anything. Again, no gore, no violence, no trauma. But those are the ones that really stick to me.
You make me you took me back to one that I dealt with. We dealt with this guy on our team. I don't know why, it just happened to be whenever our team was working, this person would call. And there was one time that he was asking for help, that he's like, I'm out in this wooded area and we had a few officers going around there, and the dude calls and he goes, you know what, you guys aren't going to find me. And we're like, no, just let us know where you're at. He goes, I'm going to go back. He goes, but I can see your guys right now. And he is giving us descriptions, and we're talking to them on a private channel and over their computers and stuff, and they're confirming what he's saying. And we're like, okay, you guys need to get out of there, because if he can see you and you can't see him, that's not a good thing. They split. And then later on, I ended up getting a call from this guy, and he's telling me how, the president's going to get assassinated, and how we need to call this phone number. And he gives me a phone number. He goes, you need to let them know. And then he hangs up, and then he calls back. He goes, have you called yet? And I said, sir, we're going to get you some help. And he goes, I don't want you to help me. I want you to help the president. And I'm like, okay. And so, he gets off the phone. And I remember yelling over to my supervisor, and I said, you know what, I'm going to call this phone number because I'm curious. I just want to see where it goes to. And then, so I call it, and I hear White House switchboard. And I said, excuse me? And she said, yeah. And I said, no, seriously, like, this is the White House switchboard. And she goes, yes, sir. What? And so I tell her who I am. And I said, there's a gentleman, and I gave his name, and she goes, oh yeah, so-and-so, he's harmless, he's fine. I was like, oh, you know who he is? And she goes, oh yeah, he's already been checked out, he's harmless. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Thumbs up.
Yeah, I know. Again, people have these, and one thing I've learned working on the ambulance is that the mind is such a powerful thing, and it will take over your body, and it will change your reality for our patients, right? So I've seen some really crazy things in that way. But the great thing about that and having those experiences is that it really changes my perspective. I realize when I come home, and after seeing a kid who is a young kid who's preteen, and he tells me he wants to rape his sister and murder his mom. He's having this psychiatric. He's got clear psychiatric problems. Mm-hmm. And then I come home, and and my family is loving and caring, and the biggest problem that we have is cell phone use time, right? So it really kind of puts in perspective how lucky I am, anyways. So I think that's a big gift too, for this job where you see how messed up and how much trouble people are in. And then you realize that, your situation is pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to say this, but I want to get into your art as well, because I think it's a good segue into it. I would have calls sometimes that would deal with children, and I wouldn't realize at the time that it was, affecting me or anything, because, sometimes we don't have time. You just go right to the next call. You finish a CPR with the child, or even just a child who's choking or something. And, you hear, and you're telling the mom, don't hit him or her on the back, don't hit your child on the back that hard. And they're yelling at me saying, well, what the fuck am I supposed to do? Let them choke and die? And I'm like, no, I'm going to help you, with the Heimlich or whichever. You're going to hurt your kid more by doing that. And so, all of these different things happening. And then I go home and I see my kid, and so I've got 4 kids, but at the time I only had the one that was there living with me, my second oldest son. And he would run up to me and he's like, Dad, how was work? And I would I would hug him. And, sometimes I would notice that I was hugging a little too tight. And, I see my tears are coming down, and he's like, what's wrong? I'm like, Dad just had a hard day at work. That's all. And, I love you, and then my wife would say, what happened? What happened? Yeah. Like, I don't even want to put what happened on you. I just needed to hug Logan, because that's what I needed to do at that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it really makes you realize how lucky you are, right?
Yeah.
When you're there for these people that are not so lucky. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, and I think about this every night before I go to work. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to work tomorrow. I know that someone's going to meet me tomorrow, and it's going to be the worst day of their life.
Yeah.
Potentially the last day of their life. but they're doing the same thing I am. They're watching the football game right now, or they're having dinner with their family right now. But tomorrow we're going to meet. And it's not if, it happens every shift where I go and it's craziness into the circus, and they don't know, right? So they are just like us. So this stuff happens to normal people. But our paths will meet the next day. The difference is I know it's going to happen and they don't.
Exactly. Yeah. It happens every day, everywhere. And as we're switching over to this next part, we've got your art. And you talk about how it's stuff that you've experienced. And I guess what was the first thing that happened? What was it that happened that really made you want to start doing this? Doing these paintings, doing these photos, and showing these experiences, and just what was the inspiration? Was there an actual incident that happened that you just start, kind of sketching or putting pictures together or something, and just like, wow, this is very powerful? How did it start?
Well, it was all very personal, and it was never my intent to share them with anybody, right? So after many years of having the experiences that I had, it started to affect me, right? And I didn't know, so I never really had that one incident that like was, holy crap, that I've hurt myself. My brain is different now because of this one call. For me, it was a gradual thing. So over time, I started having all these symptoms that I didn't know was from that. So, anxiety, depression, anger, isolating myself, a lot of the common signs and symptoms of PTSD. And I didn't know that I was having these. I didn't realize they were work-related. To the point of suicide. I was planning to take my life, and I'd go to work and be a good paramedic and firefighter. And then, okay, today's the day on the way home from work today, I'm going to drive in front of that bus because I just cannot take this constant pressure of just feeling shitty all the time, and not sleeping well and waking up. And I during the day, I could kind of consciously defend myself from it. But at night, it was worse because I know that at nighttime, my mind would just have these horrific nightmares, and I'd wake up feeling so bad. And I was like that for years. And I'm like, God, I just can't take it anymore. And it's not that I wanted to leave my family. I just didn't want to feel anything anymore. I just was exhausted of trying to defend myself again. I was feeling this was just, I'm like, I'm just sad. I'm having a bad day. Always thinking the next day was going to be better. And it just never was. But what I didn't realize was happening at that time was my brain chemistry had changed because of what had happened. And I didn't really realize what trouble I was in. And I had lost the capacity to tell myself, hey, Dan, it's probably not a good idea for you to take your life on your way home. Maybe there's other solutions. I didn't know that that was a possibility because my brain chemistry had changed. So what had happened, we listened to the psychologist. So at work, the psychologist came to work and for the city, and he was speaking to everybody about trauma and PTSD. And he started listing off all these symptoms that I was having. And he says, yeah, this was from, this is the natural mind's reaction to trauma. And he explained that, sometimes it's not from just one thing happening. It could be from a gradual time of continuous stressors. So I thought, oh, hey, maybe I'm not just sad. Maybe my wife isn't unreasonable, or my boss is a dick. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm broken, or maybe, I'm injured. I didn't know. So then I got assessed, and sure enough, I realized that, there's something was wrong with my brain because of the experiences that I had. And part of my treatment was to purge these emotions. And I described them as these organic monsters that invade my consciousness uninvited. So it wasn't so much the specific calls, it was these emotions and these negative organic things that were living in my mind. So for a way for me to capture them is that I would recreate them in an image. So think of something, and then an image would pop into my mind, and then I would stage it. So none of my artwork is actual images from or pictures of actual calls. They're based on real calls.
Yeah.
But I would stage them and then photograph them and then I would paint over that photograph. But while I was doing that, I would try to recreate how I was feeling rather than what I saw, right? And then in that process, I captured that organic monster into this image, right? And then that's how I saw the picture. So the first couple of pictures that I did, God, I would never share with anybody. It was a paramedic with his gloved hands on his head, which is disgusting, with a dead patient in the back of the ambulance. And the spirit of the patient is sitting in the airway seat, looking at the paramedic, and he's mad, he's pissed, right? And it's based on a call that I did. So when I was done, I'm like, oh wow, it's very emotional to create them. But I'm like, I'm not going to share this with anybody, because the community showing a paramedic that's emotional with gloved hands on his head, I'm going to get crucified, I thought. So I didn't. So I created a few more pictures and never shared them with anybody. And that wasn't the purpose of creating the artwork. It was for my own therapy. I was lucky that I found a way to process and purge these things in my head. It was never my intent to share them with others. But I thought, that first picture, it just looked really cool. It looked kind of cartoony, and I thought, I'm going to share it anyways and see what happens. Just because just graphically, it looks cool. Mm-hmm. And so I did that, and I shared it to my friends on Facebook, all of whom I personally knew, my 30 friends. And I went from 30 friends to 30,000 followers on Facebook in one day from that one picture. Wow. I thought my phone was broken. So the one thing I didn't realize my artwork would do was my peers attached their experiences to the artwork. They would look at the images and it would do the same for them. It would kind of put this complex emotion into this one easy to interpret image, right? So it kind of made this complex thing that's hard to describe, something you can't talk to your family about, something that you can't really make sense yourself, and kind of made sense of it in one image. And everyone kind of looked at it differently because their experiences were different. Mm-hmm. And so the exact opposite happened. I thought I'd be crucified, but the exact opposite happened. I didn't realize, which was really a huge healing experience for me, because I didn't know that others felt the same way, which is why I think your podcast is important, because you share these experiences and other people realize, hey, you know what, maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe I'm not unusual or weird for feeling the way that I'm feeling. Right. Because lots of other people are feeling. I don't think everyone does, but lots of us do. And to have that sense of, hey, you know what, you're not weird. There's nothing, it's normal. It's a normal reaction to the craziness that you see. And it happens to a lot of us. And that, for me, that was a huge deal. And a big part of my healing process was make that realization that I'm not alone. And that's where that work started. Man. And that's why I still make it.
And no, I'm so glad that you did. You were going through all of this. It's your own healing process. But yeah, you're right. It's how others attach themselves. It's kind of like some of the I Am 911 stories. There are people that read them and do kind of that same thing, is where they attach themselves to it. But the way that you put them in here, and I'm actually gonna pull this up here, for those who are currently listening on your favorite podcasting app, you'll have to go and find the video, but as well, go to Daniel's website to check these out. So I'm gonna pull these up here. And this is DanSunPhotos.com, and so we're looking at some photos that are coming up here. But I'm gonna go ahead and go to the galleries, and actually I'm gonna go to EMS first before going to communications. Now there are all of these different ones that are here. Now this one that's up here on the screen as of right now, this is definitely something that is going on right now in 2020 with COVID. I'm assuming, because I see the the virus right here. Are you able to kind of explain this a little bit for those who are watching?
Yeah, sure. So for this one, it represents it's a complex idea.
Mhm.
And again, they're all very personal to me. But this is a paramedic who is experiencing, he has PTSD or he has a mental injury, and he's dealing with that. Now, the bottom left, I always use devils or demons to represent trauma and angels to represent treatment or recovery.
Mhm.
So this guy's being pulled from lots of different directions. So, often when we think about PTSD, or we associate that with the trauma that we see, but the reality is that may not be the case. Or there's lots of other stressors that are cause of our injuries. So in this case, the devil there is just one part of it, or maybe that was the cause of his trauma. But what happens after that trauma or after that crazy call can be more significant and more predictable on whether or not you're going to go back to work or not. So the support that you have from family, friends, management can really, and there's a whole thing that's called sanctuary trauma and perceived injustice, and a whole thing of things that happen after that initial trauma, of how your experiences are after that can really determine if you're going to recover. So this picture shows that a paramedic is being, it's not just the trauma. So it's not just the devil there. It's his family who's pulling on his arm there. It's his peers. So I have an RCMP officer in this case pulling on one arm. There's a white manager there pulling on his other leg. So he's trying to balance all these different stressors in his life, and amongst all that now is COVID. So he's trying to do all the stuff in the middle of COVID time. So this is just a thing that's showing all the stressors that we have, and sometimes, PTSD isn't from that one particular call or event. It's a lot of different things that we're trying to balance. And this just is letting my peers know that, I validate what they're feeling, I support them, and I understand what they're going through this image.
It's powerful, man. This is amazing work. I'm going to switch over to communications now, and there is one here. Let me see. I think it's this one right here. Yes. Okay. So this one right here, man, this one, when I saw this one really got me as well, because I remember having moments like this where I just can't believe the shit that's going on. But if you look in the screens, they're faces of people who are crying, sad. Some look like they might be abused. There's a gentleman there in the middle with a gun to his head. And to me, this is a depiction of different triggers as well, from the different calls that, and again, like you were saying, everyone interprets it different. So
based on your own experiences.
Yeah, in my interpretation, these are different calls that I've taken, but also, different triggers of voices and stuff that I've heard as well.
And I did that, purposely. I put the faces in the screens, because that's, I've done other communications artwork where, these spirits are kind of around or sitting on the desk or next to the person. But this one I put specifically there in your mod, because that's the gateway, right? That's how you see them, or that's how you get them.
Right.
That's where they come from, I guess.
And so this one here, this is where some of those are in the background like that. Yeah. So this one here is out of Harris.
Yeah, and that's in Houston. That's where this is one of the girls that I spoke to when I first wanted to learn about. So this is one of those images that I did from that photo session. And the one on the top right there too is another one, which is probably the most popular dispatch image that I've done, is that one. Or there's no ghost, but there's this small dispatch that's just being swallowed by her workstation, and she's literally just really overwhelmed by all the pressure that she's feeling, and by all these screens all around her, which are meant to represent, the pressures that are put on her.
Right. I was going to say, I don't think you can see it, but man, I got goosebumps right now just looking at this picture and thinking about that, and yeah, this one is so fully also up for interpretation, because yeah, there's nothing in there like the other ones that have, you know, the faces or ghostly images or anything like that. It's what the hell is going on in there? What did she just hear? Or what has been going on in this shift where she's now left like that? It's
Yeah.
a very powerful image.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And that's probably the most popular dispatch one I've done. And the first one I've done.
Man, there's there's so much that goes into all of this, and the way that you put it out there. I know I keep using the same word over and over, but I can't help it. These are powerful images. There's so much to it, and it says a lot in what it is that we see, and the way that you're interpreting it. Like you said, you spoke to people and they told you all about it, and in the beginning you didn't understand. Well, I mean, you got it.
Mm-hmm. And the reaction is the same, right? So, you know, if I go to a call and have to tell a family that their dad is dead from a heart attack,
yeah,
you know, that's how I feel, right? After doing that and seeing their reaction and having to deal with their reaction, and the feeling and the response is the same. So yeah, and in many ways, it's worse for dispatchers than for us, because they're there when it's happening, or they, you know, if we go back to that scenario in the Cayman Islands when I saw the guy hit by a dump truck, I pulled up and I wanted to make sure someone called 911, and there was a person on the phone, and they were hysterical talking to the operator. And I was thinking, as I'm sitting next to this guy who's folded in half, who's gargling, I remember thinking, God, I'm glad I'm not the person on the other end of that phone having to deal with that person, right? Yeah. And I'm like, and I was there, and I'm like, oh God, how do you deal with someone that is that hysterical, to calm them, to get the information that you need? And I'm like, great, I'm glad that I'm not having to deal with that. I'll deal with the guy that's folded in half. It's easier.
Yeah.
So I have a huge respect for communications and people that have to take those initial calls from people having these emergencies. It's I could not do it.
This one right here also, you know, you've got the ghostly figure of a you know, firefighter, and that, man, there's a lot of us who have dealt with, you know, those that we've worked with who have, you know, passed away on duty or have been injured or whichever, and you know, a lot of those stick with us. You know, I had a good friend that was a state trooper, and I remember coming in to work and having one of the supervisors, I was a supervisor as well, coming in, and having that supervisor pull me off to the side and say, you know, so and so, they found him. And I said, what? And they said he went missing, and they found him, you know, with his own, he had taken his life with his own weapon. And then you have to prepare, you not only have to take that in, but you also have to prepare the rest of your team who's coming in as well, who might not know what's going on. And then you continue working that day with all this information in your head that, damn, I was just talking to this person the other day and he seemed fine.
Yeah.
But he obviously wasn't.
Yeah. Like for this picture, this one is, she's a fire dispatcher. Mm-hmm. So for firefighters, if we are, you know, if we're in a structure fire and it collapses and we're trapped, you know, our radio is that's our communication, right? So we are talking with our dispatcher, and the incident commander, right? So that is, that's our communications, right? So for this fire dispatcher who was communicating with this firefighter, you know, who died, you know, that's why they're hugging each other, because that was his last communication. That was who he was speaking with last.
Yeah.
And she has to live with that, right? And sometimes they're trapped for a long time before they either get rescued or they die. So it's, yeah, it's a horrible situation to be in.
I can see where this also, this this image, not only for, you know, what this is based on, but others who have seen it, who have dealt with similar incidents, is also very therapeutic.
Yeah, again, I think I know I'm super happy that my artwork has been so well received throughout the community. And again, it's my own therapy, it's my own thing. But yeah, I think it's more of a catalyst for other people's journeys based on their own experiences. And that's why everyone will react to it differently, based on what they do.
So with everything that you do, and especially this artwork as well, which again, I applaud you. This is amazing, powerful work, and thank you for doing it. You also do keynote speeches. So
Yeah.
in these speeches, I mean, are you also talking on the side of like mental health and wellness or PTSD or anything like that? You know, finding, you know, some sort of therapy through your art to inspire others to do, you know, something similar, whether it just be writing stuff down or talking to someone. You know, what is it that you share through your keynotes?
Yeah. So when I speak, and again, that's something that just happened by accident as well. As the artwork became more popular, I started getting invited to go to EMS conferences and to just display the artwork. And then when I was there, people would ask me, you know, why do you create the artwork? And I would tell them, and they say, hey, Dan, you should be talking about that. You should be, you know, having a session. I'm like, oh, what would I talk about? I'm like, tell us what you just told us. I'm like, oh, okay. So I started doing that. And then, so when I talk, I focus on post-traumatic growth, right? I don't, when the first few conferences I would go to, people would go up there and they just talk about their story, and it'd be really depressing and sad. And I'd feel like shit after I would hear all these stories of how, you know, this is who I am. I'm a police officer. You know, this is what happened to me. Now I have PTSD. Now my life sucks. Thanks for listening to me. Right. Which I think it's important to share that.
Right.
Because other people realize you're not alone. But now what? You know, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Is your life suck forever now until you die or take your own life? Like what happens? So what like I said, I'm doing a lot of research. I'm pursuing this master's in psychology, and so I'm really interested. I have a passion now for trauma and recovery and finding out why this really happens and what can we do about it. So I really focus on post-traumatic growth, and that's what I talk about. So I share my story. I'm like I'm up here. This is what happened to me. These are the experiences that I had. But what I focus on is this is how I get better. This is how I got better. These are the things I do that saved me and that I continue to do. And by the way, there's this silver lining around this trauma, that if you can do the work, if you restructure your mind, go and get the help that you need, and essentially rewire your mind, when you're done, you can actually come out a different person, you know, a better person than you were even before the trauma. And that's something that's what I talk about is post-traumatic growth. There's a lot of studies on it, and it's not something new. You know, let's say if you think of Batman, who, again, Batman's not real, but the idea of it has been in our society a long time. You know, Batman sees his family get murdered, and then because of that trauma, he turns into this crime fighter. You know, a lot of superheroes are like that. Spider-Man's the same way. A lot of religions believe that there's no growth without suffering. There's a lot of examples of people who have managed through that trauma and have come out and done great things because of it. And that is an opportunity for a lot of us who have these traumas to do the work and actually come out better than we were before. And I'm a living example of that. I'm an example of that. I am a better person than I was before my trauma because of the treatment that I've done. And I'm doing things now that I never would have dreamed of doing before I was diagnosed. So I share that. And I hope that, you know, if I say those things and there's a lot of people that are like that. I do a conference every couple of years where I invite people to come and talk about their experiences of post-traumatic growth. I do a lot of traveling. I meet lots of my peers. You know, I invite medics from, you know, that worked in 9/11 and, you know, the shootings in Las Vegas. And, and they come and say, yeah, these are the things that happen. This is how it affected me. But this is what I did to get better. And now these are the amazing things I'm doing because of it. So I share that experience with others so that people that are maybe in that space where, yeah, you know what, like where I was, where I just can't take this anymore. I just don't want to feel things anymore. If they say, hey, well, Dan was in this spot. He's like me. He's a paramedic. You know, if he can do it, then I can do it. You know, what do I have to do? Well, what did Dan do? Then I can do the same thing. So I think it gives people hope, and not so much hope to get better, but to be better than they were even before. Because a lot of people aren't aware of the concept of post-traumatic growth, and you know, you rebuild it. It's kind of like a seed. I use the seed when I do my talk, where the seed has to break open in order to flower up, but the seed essentially gets destroyed in the process. So if your seed's already cracked and destroyed, you might as well grow a flower to your head, right? And do amazing things. And it can happen. But it's not easy. You need to, you know, take your life by the rein. That's probably not the right way to say it, but take control of your life.
Yeah.
And make the decision to get better and do the work, and amazing things will happen.
Yeah.
For most of us.
For sure. You know, a lot of the times too, and you know, people don't like to hear it. They don't like to admit it. But a lot of times that obstacle, whatever it is that is stopping you, right there, you know, you are the one who, you know, sometimes is holding you back. And a lot of people don't like to admit that they're their own issue. But you know, then they start working at it and they get past it. And like you're saying, you know, they end up flourishing. And that's when you come out on the other end strong.
Yeah, and unfortunately, when people they're in it for a really long time, that becomes their identity. So I'll ask people, you know, do you identify more with your trauma or who you were before the trauma?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, for those of us that are, because it consumes your everything about you, and until it does become you, and then that's who you are. You are your trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we don't realize that we've made that switch where, yeah, I identify with that. And then you become scary and like, well, that's who I am. If I don't have that, then who am I? Right. And this is, well, do you want to be who you were before, or do you want to do something even better? And, you know, don't identify with your trauma. That's just something that happened to you. You know, fix it. And of course, there's many different levels of trauma that, you know, some people have debilitating trauma, because we're all different. So I don't want to group everyone together, but,
right.
And those people need everyone needs different therapy, but, you know, I'm just saying that some of us are a lot more severe than others, where they may not have the capacity to even get to the post-traumatic growth phase, but many of us are, as long as we don't identify with our trauma. That's not who we are. That's, you know, that may be who we are for a long time, but it doesn't mean it has to be that way all the time.
Yeah. And, you know, also sometimes in some cases, getting out of that circle of everyone that you know in public safety and do things outside of the industry as well. You know, for me, so around 6 or 7 years in, I think it was 6, I hit burnout stage. And I loved what I was doing. I still love the industry and everything. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I didn't. But you know, I had to find a way for myself to get back that fire, you know, that passion that I had. And for me, it was going back to school. So I did college online, and every main project that I was doing, it had to do with public safety. I mean, the original concept for everything that I do now started out as a college project. It was a digital storytelling, and I shared a couple stories of my coworkers, and people were blown away by it. And I thought, I think I got something here, and I've just been sharing and sharing and sharing. But it took kind of falling out of what was going on and being burnt out, and just, you know, I was in a shitty spot, and ended up wanting to turn it around, and turning this into a way to educate the public as well as those out in the field to learn more about dispatch. So mine was really just doing more projects to be able to get that fire back.
Yeah, and why not use that experience to your advantage, right? We all have, you know, those of us that are burned out, who have done the work, and have the scars to prove it, then yeah, that could be a huge advantage to you. You know, I speak with a lot of paramedics that are, or emergency workers that are starting mental well-being projects, and you know, they say they're intimidated. They work with these psychologists and these doctors, and they say they're kind of intimidated by these psychologists. I'm like, hey, says, for the guy that comes to your program, or the girl that comes to your program, that's a paramedic or a first responder, and they listen to you, who's been a paramedic for 20 years, and then listen to a psychologist who has never ever had anything to do with the emergency workers physically working in the emergency field. You are going to have way more significance to that person. Maybe not significance, but you're going to have more of a connection to that person that psychologist will. So the fact that the two of you are working together is great. You know, that is a great thing, but don't sell yourself short. You have that experience, and that experience is, in my opinion, a lot more valuable to those of us that need help than any psychologist or doctor that doesn't have that experience. Now, if you can get a psychologist that also has that experience, then yeah, then that's great. But yeah, if you have that, you know, if you're at that burnout stage, you know, you've done that work, you've earned that experience. Turn it around and have that work in your advantage, which is exactly what you're doing, right? And that's what I'm doing. And I have lots of friends that are doing that. And in the process, we're helping lots of people, which is great, right?
For sure. That's the ultimate goal, you know, and also others learning from our experiences, you know, so that maybe they don't have to go through something. They can see, or maybe, you know, they are starting to go through something, or they've you know, experienced whatever situation, but they've seen it through you know, our eyes, our experiences, or others that are attached as well. So as we go into the wrap up of this episode, I could talk to you for hours, man.
Yeah, thanks. No, I love talking about this stuff. It's great.
This has been amazing. I'm gonna have to have you on again for sure. As we go into the wrap up of this episode, you talk about post-traumatic growth, and for anyone who is starting to, I guess, you know, in that stage where they're trying to grow, you know, from as it says in that term, post-traumatic growth. I guess, what is some advice, you know, for those, and also from your experience, those who are starting to go through this and are recovering and trying to grow out of whatever situation or stress they might have had, to continue going and ask for help also?
Yeah, I always compare mental injury to physical injury. And sometimes you need, you know, if you're gonna break your leg, you can't walk that off, or you can't, oh, tomorrow morning it's going to be better. You need help sometimes, right? So it's okay to ask. Someone needs to, and I've done our work about it. Someone needs to grab you and pull you out of that cloud of darkness sometimes, and say, hey, you know, I'm here to help you. So if you're having thoughts of taking your life, and that's a reality for us too, right? We're at the point where, you know, suicide rates for us are 4 times higher. So you can go one way or the other. You know, you can end up taking your life because you can't take the pressures anymore, or you can do the work and be a phoenix, right? Do the work, and from those ashes grow into this fiery bird and do amazing things. You cannot do that on your own, right? You need to ask for help. If you don't feel comfortable asking help from your employer, which a lot of us aren't, and which I totally get, that's okay. There's other resources. There's other external resources. There's online, just search on Google, no matter where you're from, for, you know, online PTSD self-assessment, right? And lots of stuff will come up based on what you answer. It will give you some ideas for resources. There's a lot of places. Code Green campaign in the States is a great list of resources to get the help that you need. But the problem is, a lot of us don't even realize we're in trouble, right? I didn't even know that I was in trouble. So a big part of it too is keeping an eye on your peers, and if you recognize different behavioral changes, or they're starting to isolate, or they get really angry quickly, or they're starting to get really quiet. They're not talking as much, or you just kind of see these really big changes in them. Approach them and say, hey, and if you say, are you okay? They're going to say, yeah, I'm fine. Mm-hmm. Say, hey, I've noticed some changes in your behavior, and give examples. I'm just checking in and see if you're okay. And if there's anything I can do to help you, right? Even that literally could save someone's life by doing that, because that might make them realize, hey, yeah, maybe there is something that I should do, and get assessed. If you have the resources to get assessed by a psychologist, and they get the help that you need, then do that. The next tricky part is to find out what help actually works for you. Because unlike a broken leg, where it's pretty standard, procedure to fix that, a broken mind's a lot different. Our Band-Aids for a broken mind are different for everybody. And sometimes it's really tough to figure out what that is that works for you. So that's what I would say to my brothers and sisters.
Thank you, man, so much for all of this. And how can people find out more about you? I'm going to put this up here on the screen really quick. So there's dansunphotos.com, but how else can people get a hold of you? Social media, email, whichever.
Yeah, they can. Well, my email is daniel@dansunphotos.com. If you Google me, I've got a pretty big social media presence on Instagram and Facebook. That's the great thing about that, is I'll post some new images there. And my peers or emergency services family will comment on them, and they'll communicate with them. Even that, when you see that and you see all the different comments, that gives me a sense of, hey, I'm not alone in creating this picture. A lot of us feel this way. Yeah. And that brings me comfort, just reading all those messages. So it's you can contact me through there. You can communicate with with other people that contact me through there. And I always try to be positive and not kind of dwell in the, my life sucks, I got PTSD, I want to kill myself. And although that is a reality for many of us, my goal is to try to get people out of there and give them the help that they need.
Awesome.
That's what I try to do.
Thank you so much for being on. And this has been an honor to have you on.
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo. This was really fun. I appreciate you having me on your show.
Yeah, this has been excellent. I'll be right back here with you. For those who are watching, if you have any comments, questions, or you want to be a guest on the show, you can email us, and that is going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter. That is @91podcast. You can like us on Facebook, and that is facebook.com/within-the-trenches-podcast. This episode has been sponsored by InDigital, as well as Rapid Deploy, and a big thanks to all the patrons. If you are looking for any bonus content, you can check us out, and that's going to be patreon.com/WTTpodcast. This episode can be seen on Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as YouTube, and you can hear it as well 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone.